Welcome back to the Win with Dice podcast, a podcast featuring members of the Win with Dice team, and this week, a special guest. Joining me is my co-host, Ramon.
What's up, guys?
And this week, we have a guest on who people may recognize from hanging out in the channel comments or on the live streams. We have Mitchell with us.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
This has been a long time coming because you have talked about some of your games in the channel comments, and we keep wanting to know more. So that's basically what we're going to be doing this week.
Yeah, this is an episode for us. But hey, if you're new to the Win with Dice podcast, the podcast all about tabletop RPGs. Calvin and I like to take a casual personal hobby, so on this show, we like to talk about the games that we run and the games that we play, and the cool, wonderful people we get to experience the hobby with. If you're, new to tabletop RPGs, what are you doing? Go find yourself a table, go find yourself some friends, go have some fun. But when you're back and you are a player at Summon's table, maybe it's your turn to jump behind the GM screen and give your table a cool, fun session. It's super awesome, I swear.
Indeed. So yeah, like I said, this week we're going to just be hanging out with Mitchell and talking about some awesome Lancer and Pathfinder games. But before we get into all that fun stuff, we have to get to the most important part of the show, the Win with Dice weekly GM tip of the week.
Yes, the Win with Dice weekly GM tip of the week, brought to you by Mitchell. Thanks, Mitchell.
Hey, not a problem. So what I like to discuss is actually dungeon design and why it's important to watch more movies and read more books. So as a young 12-year-old, just getting into the hobby and studying how to make maps and dungeons and stuff, I went to the biggest resource I had, which was video games. So yeah, I distinctly remember circa 2002 grabbing my copy of Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask with a notepad and running through different dungeons that I liked and recording down what I thought stood out to them and what I thought made for interesting challenges. I rapidly discovered this doesn't translate to an RPG very well, like a TTRPG, because when you play a video game, usually your penalty for getting a challenge wrong is time. You fall down a gap you're trying to jump across, usually you just climb back up and try again, or you get a game over, and then you have to start from your last save and rinse and repeat until you finally get it right. In a TTRPG, that just feels tedious. Make an athletics check to cross the gap. Oh, I rolled a 1. Great. Roll it again. And rinse and repeat until you finally get that 15, 20, or whatever you need to get across the gap. That just feels boring. So read books. See how a character in a novel or how a character in a movie would get across that gap. Make skill challenges by all means, but don't make them tedious and repetitious. Make sure that characters can fail forward. Make sure that even if they don't succeed, they can still advance the plot. Because if you're just sitting there waiting for a good roll to come up, you're going to lose engagement. You're going to lose your players. So read books and especially watch movies. Watch how in a movie they keep the plot going. Books you can put down, you can wait days, weeks, months before you pick them up again. But once you start a movie, usually you're engaged, you're going to watch that movie all the way through, and the plot doesn't stop advancing, at least for most movies. So make sure that while you're doing your game, the plot advances. Mm-hmm. And that kind of touches on another thing of the idea of failing forward, because nothing feels worse in a game than having again, you need that DC 15 skill check in order to advance the plot, but you don't do it. You have rogues trying to pick a trap or pick a lock, and it's going nowhere. So let your characters fail forward. Let them make that check, and if they fail it, okay, they fail the check. They unlock the door. Their lockpick breaks. So now on future checks, they're going to be getting a penalty on disabled device because their lockpick's broken.
Yeah.
So that means that, again, the plot's advanced, but you're not just sitting there dice chucking, hoping you get the good roll.
Yeah, additionally, along with just knowing more media and how the plot moves forward, you make a really good point there about just fail states and making them not so binary in that, failing a challenge means the game is basically over until you repeat it again. Actually, it kind of reminds me of Rise of the Runelords, which we've been playing recently. Just a small part of it, but there's a part where you have to cross a certain bridge. But if you were to, without going into too much detail, if you were to fall off that bridge, there's still a way to move forward. You just have an extra challenge you need to deal with, like that falling and everything else that comes with it.
I actually was in a game with a new GM last night, and it was my first time playing Dungeons & Dragons, so I actually had 5e. I had no clue what the game was like, which is interesting. The fighter works out really well, so I would highly suggest anybody who's playing that game for the first time, surprise, just use a fighter. It works. But yeah, I think there was some parts where it was kind of like just doing checks over and over again, and I think the issue a lot of new GMs kind of gravitate towards is like, oh, you didn't get the save, so we're just gonna stay here until you get it. Where instead it should be like failing forward is good, but failing sideways I think is better. It's like, it's not interesting to keep rolling the checks. It's more interesting to like learn something new about what's the situation, right? Even if you are repeating that check, like giving the little bit of spice to where it's like, oh, you know, you like giving the feeling of like, I don't know, something's attacking you or strangling you or something like that, right? Like learning something about what the fuck is actually attacking you if it was a surprise or something like that, right? Just like, yeah, like you said, Mitchell, like books and movies are a good way because those characters still fail, but the reader still needs to be like the story needs to still evolve, and you have to either learn something new or go someplace new or talk to somebody new, right? So like if you fuck up, you gotta like the plot has to like keep on rolling. We can't just sit here until you succeed.
I don't know if this is a time for a good tangent, but like one of the things I really like about the RPG Monster of the Week is that it has a luck system where every character gets 7 luck. And, you know, let's say, for example, your party's running from a pack of werewolves. Like they're going, you thought you guys were fighting vampires. You're all staked out with steaks and garlic, but oh, turns out not an ounce of silver between any of you. And pack is about to like just rip you all limb from limb. You duck in, like break into a car, and you're trying to hotwire the damn thing. You roll a check to see if you can actually like get the car going and just peel out of there. And you get the snake eyes. You roll absolute hot garbage. So it's like, well, what do? You can't just have the story end there. You can spend a luck point. Spend one of your 7 luck points that, like, one turns into a pass, and you can just advance the plot that way. And again, that's such a great system. I really like it. I thought it was such a revolutionary idea because, again, baked into the mechanics of the game, it just is like, yeah. I really like your idea too there of failing sideways. Like, you have to have those ways that even when there's a failure, you still get something out of it. Like,
Yeah.
You got to keep that engagement too, because like you start to lose your players, like you start to lose their interest in what's going on. Well, then your goose is cooked. Like, you know, you're not making a game, you're making a test in patience.
Yeah, and there is like a little bit of joy in the pain of others, right? Like we all laugh at somebody falling down, right? So you do have the opportunity to have those moments, but it shouldn't be all the time, right? Like it should just be like, you know, you fail, you make a funny joke about the dude falling on his ass, and then like you move on, right?
Absolutely.
Some players are cool with that. Some players like to ham it up and be like the comedian type character. We're just like, oh, my character's just an idiot and he's just bumbling around. But you know, not all players like that, and you can just like tune in onto that and just kind of like know when to move on, know when to just kind of like make the character feel cool. And if the character's been like rolling pretty shit for like the night, still give that person the grace of like, you know, you have an idea of who your character is in your head, so maybe this failure isn't just like a complete tomfoolery moment, it's just maybe just like a slight mistake. That could also like go so far into like making the experience better for your players and for you too, because like, you know, you have this cool idea of this cool dude in your head. Like you don't have to describe him being an idiot, right? Like you have the story in your head too that you want to tell.
Mm-hmm. And like, I don't know, I think Lancer's a great example. Like your characters are already at level 0. Your characters are already like the best of the best. They're not just some like generic jabroni. Like they are a pilot. They are like above the rest. So to have like your character bumble around, to have like, you know, just the absolute garbage rolls, yeah, it doesn't feel good. It feels like you wasted your session if you just can't roll above 10 to save your life. Sometimes literally.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, yeah. Those moments you could totally describe it. Like I like the luck mechanic, because like what you mentioned in Monster of the Week, I think that's super awesome, and probably will just steal that. I mean, I do a similar thing with the Pathfinder like hero points. Like I don't really run hero points. I just give people out stuff. I'm pretty easy, as you can probably heard. But it's like I like the idea that like your luck can run out, right? So it's just like there, you know, sometimes like in that game, because like, you know, you're being attacked, I'm assuming, by like horrible things. So and eventually your luck's gonna run out, and then like you're in a real bad situation. But just the idea that I can form a sentence out of those game mechanics is like, it's like really hype.
Oh, totally. And yeah, it actually is canon that when you spend your last luck point, whatever it is you're doing will either immediately kill you or the plot will just immediately kill you after. So yeah, you
Yeah.
don't want to use all your luck points willy-nilly. Like sometimes just take the fail. But again, as long as the plot moves forward, that's the golden ticket right there. Make sure the plot goes forward.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a pretty good tip of the week. Let's go. Unless Calvin, you have anything else to add?
I mean, I don't want to tangent too much off the tangent, but I do like how that luck mechanic puts the power in the player's hands, so that they can nudge things forward if things aren't working out for them. But it also it puts the cost in their hands to deal with. It's not something the GM has to push on them, and as the GM, you don't have to worry about making up a way for them to get out of the situation. They can spend a resource and collaborate narratively to figure out a solution to that. Mutants and Masterminds has something similar with their hero points and how they work.
Yeah, I like Kane on the back end. Kane has the agony mechanic where it's if you fail a roll, you get a point in agony, and then on another roll later on in the mission, you can dump all of the agony you've built up. I think you could build up 3, and you can break the dice cap on a roll, so you can build up all the bad luck can build up to a cool important moment where it's oh, I need this to work 100% or else I'm gonna die. But now I have all this good karma built up onto me, so then now it's gonna work. And it's it works so well. Tom did a really fucking good job of that game. It works so well because everything kind of builds up to that moment where you confront the sin, and then all of the bad stuff that happened during the investigation or whatever up until that point, and you're in that high intensity moment of oh shit, this monster's gonna kill me, but actually I got 3 sin, I'm gonna roll 9 dice now because we set this crazy thing up, and you get to have your cool anime moment.
You need to get that awesome anime moment.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, if you end a session, you didn't have a cool anime moment where either you kick someone's ass or you wipe someone's tear off your face and say, don't worry, kid, I got you. What are you doing? Go make that happen. That's what your players want. They know they want it, even if they don't say it, they want it. But anyway, that's the tip of the week, folks. Like I said, make sure that you're always kind of failing forward or failing sideways. Just don't be too stuck in the moment and have nothing happen. You don't want to test the patience. You want you want to have a good time.
Yeah, and also to reference media to see how they keep moving plots forward when they have a limited amount of time to work with.
Oh yeah, for sure.
All right, well, let's get into, now that we've loosened up and rambled, let's get into the episode proper, and I want to introduce Mitchell to everyone and let you sort of describe yourself. And again, people might know Mitchell from hanging out around the channel, a known tabletop gamer and Dead Space enjoyer. So Mitchell, what do you want to tell people about yourself, just so our listeners can get to know you?
I'm a big-time gamer. I've been playing D&D since, I dabbled into 2nd edition, but I was around when 3rd first came out, 3rd, edition proper, and I've been playing since then, so that's circa 2000. I've gone from all the usual tropes of making the characters who are my tragic backstory began when I was 5 years old and my village was burned down by orcs, to now where I'm more than happy to write entire pages of backstory for my characters. And one consistent thing though, I'm basically the forever GM. I'm the guy who largely does it every session with most games. My friends have done a really good job at taking their turns as well, but usually one way or another I'm back behind the GM screen. So, and
Yeah.
you know what, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, there's no problem being the captain, right? Sometimes it's just you're just the guy. You're just the guy that everyone is yeah, Mitchell's got it.
Well, basically. But yeah, for me, Lancer, my friend Chloe introduced me to the game back when I believe it was still in beta. So NHP weren't a thing yet. They were still called dummy plugs, and the game hadn't quite been ironed out yet. But yeah, we played it. We enjoyed it, my group and I, and then we kind of ran with it. When the Kickstarter came up, I backed it because I just thought it was so cool. Also a fan of Kill 6 Billion Demons, which, kind of helps, keep you interested. But yeah, it was actually really funny. Around this time, Pandemic had began, and I was having a little bit of an existential crisis because I'd never actually ran a sci-fi game before. I'm used to just doing, swords and spells kind of deal. But I thought about it, one day while doing like menial work at my job, and I thought, hey, you know what? I'm a big fan of Doctor Who. I've been watching it since I was like 4 years old. Star Trek, Star Wars, and like also a show that I will always rave about, Red Dwarf. I'm a fan of all these great sci-fi shows. Why can't I? And it's actually funny because a little bit symbolically, my Lancer campaign began with my players on foot, not in their mechs, completing their final trial to become pilots. And that final trial was they had to fight a dragon.
Ooh.
Nice.
So for me, this was like my symbolic way of saying, okay, we're killing the dragon, and we're going from the like a fantasy type setting right into mechs and off into space. And yeah, that was like how I kicked it off. So I had my players. I guess I can go into the whole like deep dive, but yeah, and of course I'll also preface this because like I know a lot of people kind of were chatting on me in the like pilot.net chats. I completely went out of this like 11 Dragon Kid hadn't made all his videos behind the Brink Deep and Descend yet, so I didn't know the full lore of Lancer at the time. I knew the broad strokes, Union's barely holding it together, there's enemies at the gates, and yeah, your pilot's trying to figure out crises that no one else can really solve, like immediately. So going into it from that angle, I had my players belong to a planet. For me, this was a very important thing that my players knew exactly who their faction was. So they were hailing from the planet Albion. And Albion was doing its own thing. They thought they were the kings of the galaxy. They had managed to start to populate different planets in their solar system, and just when they were getting to the outer ring of the solar system, they found a ring gate. And they're like, what's this? And a whole bunch of Union guys were on there trying to take it apart, and Union's like, hey, guess what? You're not alone in the galaxy. And all the Albion were like, really? We're not alone? No. So, by the way, this particular place where you guys live, it's not yours. It actually belongs to the Onic Alliance. And it's like, sorry, what now? We belong to the who? It's like, yeah, you guys are just on the fringe of the Boundary Garden. We figured out where one of these lost ring gates was, and we're taking it back. And that's where the plot basically begins. The Albion, they get into a big, long dispute with the Onic Ascendancy and Union over who gets autonomy of their solar system, and it doesn't go well because they're just diaspora. They're just a random colony of humans that just happens to be in the wrong place. So they get the choice. They can either join the Onic Ascendancy or they can move to a new planet. And they opt for the latter. They decided to pick up shop, transfer to a new planet, and continue being their own little empire. So the players, that's the narrative where the plot begins. They know that they're pilots. They're going to be escorting their people across the stars to their new homeworld. And that's where the exciting stuff begins. And I really thought I was being clever about it, because now my players can have free reign to say, oh, I come from this quadrant or this country within Albion. I have my own background, I have my own narrative, and honestly, this was the best choice I could have made. Yeah. And this is something I think. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Yeah, I was agreeing with you. I'm like, the problem I think I run into a lot is that planets are so big and countries are so big. So why aren't you from a country from a random planet, right? Like, why are you just like, I am from Union, but actually you're from New York, right? Like, that's where you're from. You should still carry that into space. People don't just forget where they are. They don't just become a part of the hegemony like that, really. Even the idea of diaspora, you're from a place of culture, and your culture is specific to a piece of rock on a floating rock through space. You should have more connection to the ground.
Yeah, and I really tried to. Okay, so first of all, let me finish my point of I really took it to my players. So I wanted my players to tell me where they fit into this planet. So between my players, we had my friend Chloe, who made her character, who was part of the old nobility, and she just wanted to get out of that life. And my friend Cheeto, who made his character, Nathaniel, who was part of a military family, and he just wanted to keep that, his characters wanted to keep that torch running. He also wanted to become part of the military and just be the best of the best. My friend Keesman, who made his character, who was the scion of a wealthy family who's also part of the nobility. And they basically just make second-rate 3D printers, but they make the best damn 3D printers this side of the galaxy, so, that makes them famous. And I kept asking them questions about, like, okay, what does your family do? What is your family from? So my friend Chloe, her character, literally, her character's mom became the arc villain for the story. All because she kept giving me absolute gold in terms of how the relationship was and how, like, the relationship between the mother and the daughter was just absolutely sour, and there was, like, a lot of bad blood. And then how that kind of fit into this whole thing where the pilots, there's a royal family of Albion, and how not a lot of people were happy of the fact that they had to pick up shop and move. And now, another subplot to the story, they had to change their cultural identity. They no longer were Albion, they were now Caledonia, because they were moving to the planet Caledonia. So, yeah, a lot of the, like, old oligarchs and stuff were not happy about that. Particularly Genelise. He was the one who was the most upset about it, and started a civil war, as one does.
Of course.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, your whole culture is being uprooted, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think, I we talked about this a little bit in the last episode where I ranted about Gundam, where it's like, Civil War, like, if you haven't got Civil War, it should be for, like, a pretty good reason. And, like, it shouldn't just be like, this is how it always was or something like that, right? I mean, like, sure, things kind of get that way, but I think, like, as the GM, you should find out, like, where the core unrepairable thing is, right, in that situation.
Yeah. And, like, another fun thing is, like, I just kept carving out bits of lore. So, like, I wanted to make sure that the players really felt secure within this. So, a lot of military units, as I'm sure you know, have, like, a motto. So in the planet Caledonia, now Caledonia, dragons represented death. And that's why the players had to conquer death as their final initiation to become pilots. And the motto for the Lancers of this world is, we keep the company of the dragon, and we invite our enemies to join him.
Ooh.
Oh, nice. Nice.
So a lot of the times when especially my friend Cheeto, because he really got into that, whenever he would have his big anime moment, he would frequently say, "Come to join the dragon."
Nice.
Nice.
Oh, I love it. The sauce is so strong.
Yeah, it's great when people get that invested into the world building.
And this is another great thing. Make sure you have a friend who's an artist. I concluded a my buddy actually went and did a quick little like portrait of the pilots. It's probably appearing now on the screen. And one other detail I wanted: once they completed their initiation, they'd each be given totems. So the players that dealt the most damage would get the fangs or the claws of the dragon as a necklace. The leader of the unit, the one that kept their cool while fighting a dragon on foot, they got to have a cloak made of the dragon's scales. The one that took the most damage for the other players, they would get pauldrons made from the dragon's bones. And the player that was the support, the one that kept watch, would get the dragon's eyes. And that became just like, again, a recurring theme. And then, one of the other little details that I thought was really great, once they killed the dragon, the weapons they brought with them, so typically it was just like, to use gameplay terminology, like archaic weapon, light, or archaic weapon, heavy. So they either got like, longsword, or they got full, like, greatsword. Whatever one they took with them became part of their unit. So for the rest of the game, they had these swords with them. And wherever the dragon's blood was on their blades, got gilded. So whenever they draw their blades, they have gold streaks and lines on them for where they slew the dragon. That became part of their, again, cultural identity. And just became a plot point that I frequently would bring up. Like, whenever they're on foot and they had to draw swords, that those gold would shine in the light.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, it is as like pulp fantasy as, like, I love it. And it's like, I like the feel of them being like heroes from the jump. I mean, killing a dragon is like the whole point of Dungeons and Dragons at one point, right? Like, It's like the half of the game. So I like
Yeah.
that, you're that kind of this whole story that you've been telling is like an awesome moment of like transitioning from like a fantasy setting to a sci-fi setting, but still bringing all of the fantasy fun of it into this new kind of sci-fi thing. And it is kind of like also an allegory to Albion getting like introduced to this wider world and them trying to navigate that stuff, right? But like keeping that culture close to your chest, which I think is like how real world people do it a lot of the time. So it's kind of cool, man. I'm pretty hyped.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, especially like personalizing a weapon like that, making it so important to a character's history. Because, I mean, especially in Lancer, like the personal weapons your pilot carries are very easily forgettable. And I think that's something that's broadly true across many fantasy games as well. It's very easy to forget that weapon you had a few levels ago. But personalizing it, making it part of the story, it means that it's not just a D6 that you roll during combat. It's something that has importance to your character's history and that story you're creating with them and with the rest of the party.
Yo, absolutely. And that ties into the next thing that I wanted to make sure was like a mainstay. The player's drop ship. So they've graduated, they've done the ceremony, and their commanding officer basically pulls them out of the party and is like, okay, you know what, I know you guys don't want to like be part of the media circus. There's like, local news agencies all filming them, all taking their picture, congratulating the latest batch of mechanized infantry pilots. There's like Union observers looking at this like, primitive culture and how they're doing like mech pilots. And they get whisked away to the actual like back to their base where they get to like see their actual mechs, what they've actually earned by killing this dragon. And they also meet their pit crew. Probably around now you'll be seeing a picture of all the pit crew, and I wanted them to get to know the pit crew. So yeah, again, I'm kind of taking a weird approach to this. Like the first session was just talking, and it was just getting them into the weeds. So they got to meet their crew. They got assigned to a dropship called the Jackrabbit, and for me it was like a detail that they would always have the Jackrabbit to go back to, because for most of the adventure they were trundling around space and they were on the Jackrabbit, so it should feel like home. Mm-hmm. Again, to that show I keep referencing, Red Dwarf, the premise of that show is that you got the last human in known existence 10 million years away from Earth in deep space, and he's alone with a hologram of his most hated enemy, creature that evolved from his cat, called Cat, and the ship's senile AI, who is just doing his best. And it's just like one of those things where kind of like living in that isolation can do things to you. It changes like your perspective on things. So I wanted my players to feel like they had their little microcosm of people they got to hang out with. They had their microcosm of the ship they're on. And yeah, at the end of the day, that's where they're going back to. So yeah, that was just like another really important thing to me. So that way the players always knew who was going to pick them up at the end of the day, and they always knew where their home was. So again, trying to make that like shared cultural identity and that shared part of the story.
Yeah, and then you have that home base for them to go back to. You have that group of NPCs for them to go back to, and that sort of, I would guess, that would form those like relationships between the player characters and those NPCs that makes them feel more important. It makes them feel more real.
Definitely, and I had a lot of my players, they had a lot of good time interacting with the characters. I didn't go into super detailed descriptions for a lot of them. I just had like the baseline. There was like Arnold, who was just the really annoying guy. There was Dodger, who was the rich girl who did a lot of drugs. So just like these broad beats, and just let the players play with it and get to know them. And I think it worked really well.
Yeah. I think it's like if the listeners have played Mass Effect, it's like that Mass Effect effect where it's like you just have all these jabronis in your ship. So like after doing some wild mission, you come home and you just want to like go talk to Garrus for a little bit, being like, "Yo, what the hell was that?" And he's like, "Yeah, bro, that was crazy." Right? Like just to have that 100%. One-on-one time, it's really important.
100%. And then again, my friend Cheeto knocked it out of the park based on my description of what the Jackrabbit looked like. He just went and grew it. He just did an entire like deck layout of the ship, which probably also for the listeners will be appearing on the screen. Because I wanted it to feel like a real ship. And yeah, again, I love the fact that my players got to make it their own. So it was their ship, not just a ship they encountered.
Yeah, for sure. It's their story, right? So the idea that I think we talked about this a bunch, where it's like you're the one running everybody else, but you're not like the only sole person that can impart like the cool stuff into the world. It's like it's a collaboration between everybody at the table.
100%, 100%. I feel that's like a thing a lot of, especially newer GMs, forget, is that for the players, it's as much of their story as it is yours. And I think this goes both ways, both for the players and for the DM. It's a quote by like Joseph Campbell that said something to the effect of, the life that you want is ultimately the thing you pay for the life you get. So yeah, the players are going to do things to your story that you weren't counting on, and you're going to do things to the player story that they weren't counting on. And I think that's what makes it very organic, and that's what makes a story memorable. Is yeah, it's like, oh yeah, I'm totally going to marry the princess, and then you get there, and it's like, you know, the princess is not at all what you're expecting. They have somebody they are already interested in, and also your personalities do not jive. And along the way, there's like the cute farm girl that you end up actually like striking it off with, and you feel like more of a romance there. So it's like, yeah, the story you think you're gonna get and the story you actually get are often very different, but it's those differences that make the actual story memorable.
Yeah, that's for sure. That is like the most accurate description of this position in this hobby. Like, yeah. Well, yeah, that's, I mean, I think we got into like talking about the Lancer, but I think we got the vibe of who you are, Mitchell.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I don't know,
I
Calvin,
try
do you
my
want to like hard like cut to like now we're talking about it, or are we just gonna keep going?
Oh, I mean, you know, I'm just gonna put a timestamp for Lancer conversation and a timestamp for Mitchell intro, and they'll be separate things. But yeah, no, sorry, I was just looking at all this artwork again. I'm just like, again, I really love letting, like, I like when players are able to get involved in the world building. I think that's one of my favorite things about tabletop RPGs, and I feel like the campaign that you have, the way you set it up, it feels like they were able to do a lot of that, especially in their own personal spaces. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, like I say, for me, it was just a really, like, I started watching Critical Role around this point too, and something that, like, I think it was Matt Mercer said, that it's not just a matter of the GM being a fan of the players, but players should also be fans of each other.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I really wanted that to happen. So I wanted there to be memorable moments between characters, and that included, you know, telling the party, you know, again, space travel takes time. So when the players are just in the mess hall shooting the shit, they should be able to be like, yeah, like, you know, by the way, like, you know, my family does printing. My brother is really famous, but not the best actor. In fact, for my friend Keesan's character Anselm, that was the case. It was canon that his brother was a decent actor who just was very famous and would actually go on to portray Anselm in the movies of the party. So as the party was being Lancers and just doing cool stuff in robots, his brother was then taking those stories into movies.
It's cool.
Which
So that the players could like watch a movie of the thing that they just did like a couple months
Yes.
ago. It's like, oh yeah. It's just like there's just like hot versions of them like doing the most melodramatic shit. Like
Well,
that's so good.
and of course, like I explained how it's like Anselm's brother was like framed as being the main character because he's like the most famous actor, and then like Senya, who actually is the commanding officer of the party, she's being portrayed by like a Jennifer Aniston type who's just like eye candy, and the rest of the party like being completely unhappy with who they're being like represented by.
Yeah.
And to that point too, that's another thing I do with my Lancer games. I like to have the players collectively decide who the commanding officer is. So amongst your players, one of them is like just the lieutenant. They're in charge of these people. They're still going to be part of like the chain of command, but there's going to be one person on the ground in the party who is going to be accountable for things that happen, and also they're going to be the one that either is the tiebreaker for decisions or is the one that makes the hard choices. That's just a fun thing I like to do. So for my party, it was Senya. She's the girl with the the blonde girl with the eyeshadow in the picture. She was the commanding officer. She was the one who got to do all the fun stuff. Like after each mission wrapped, she would sit down with the captain on the Jackrabbit, and they'd have to have like discussions of supply and logistics. It's like, oh yeah, because like Anselm burned through his mech, we're having to repair it. So now our printer is running low on material. So we're going to have to make sure we start recycling material so we can keep your mechs printing and like stocked. So again, set dressing, I know like mechanically it doesn't have any bearing, but it's like those little details, that little minutia that keeps the story feeling organic, I find.
Yeah. I think that's. I mean, you could even do a mechanic like with like a clock or something to be like resources, right? It could be ambiguous, but it's just it's like getting the players to be more invested in the world ultimately, right? And like even having the decisions of like in battle be like, well, we running low on resources. Maybe I shouldn't, right, be too reckless, right? It could even change players' decision making in the moment, or even just like what's an action worth, right? It brings like weight to what they're doing, just even like a little bit more.
No, like that's actually okay. Again, getting off a topic a little bit, an idea I had for future adventures, which would be make repair caps a finite resource. So your party collectively, between all of them, has like, I don't know, 20 repair caps. So every time they go into a mission and use a repair cap, that takes one away from the total. So, we'll just frame it as your player has like a printer that only has so much material to print, or they don't have a printer at all and they're entirely relying on, generic purpose nanites to repair their mechs. So they have to be a little bit more cautious with when and where they repair, because maybe spending a repair cap now in mission is much more important than spending 2 repair caps later to get a structure back.
Yeah. And like the shared resource also kind of alleviates a little bit on those lighter mechs that can only have so many repair caps. So it is fun to play those guys because like they're obviously like glass cannons, but giving the like as the mission goes on, or even the story or campaign or whatever, it'll like give you opportunities as a GM and the player to add a little bit more nuance into the situation. Like maybe you do find like a cache of resources and then all of a sudden you have more repair caps, so everyone could be a little bit reckless. Or again, right, just kind of like changing the like having more of everyone's hands in the pot, you know what I mean? Like having more opportunity for people to play around with all the bits in the world is the cool part about that.
I'm really vibing with this idea, though. I was wondering, I was going to get into some mechanical questions, but we should probably. I'm sorry. What were you saying? Because I was going to ask, like, so do you recharge them by going into downtime and stuff? But I feel like that's a whole other tangent.
No, I totally could go on a big long tangent about this, especially pertaining to like a couple episodes when you got folks were talking about salvaging enemy weapons or salvaging stuff from enemies or systems, because that. Like, if you wanted to do a survival horror Lancer game, I figured that's how you would do it. Sorry, we're in the spooky season, so naturally I've been thinking about this. But that really puts, like, hack and fix as, like, a valuable skill in that type of setting. Because, yeah, then you could, your assault rifle gets destroyed. Well, guess what? We fought a generic assault mech. So maybe I can hack/fix that rifle to add it back onto my mech, da-da-da-da-da. So, again, that's one thing I really like to do is like play with mechanics and play with how you can interpret things. Similarly, a thing I just been chomping at the bit to mention to you, Cats, if you're in like a facility, having hacking be part of, make it more of a support/control thing rather than just offense. So, for example, you're in a facility, you're in like a hangar. What if you were to use hacking to hack, like, say, the sprinkler systems, and then basically just get that whitewash of foam everywhere that like the Lancaster can do. So things like that, where you could actually have your player being like, okay, I'm going to invade not the enemy mech, but I'm going to invade the terrain. So like say that the sprinkler system has only 2 heat cap. So if you just hack into it and you successfully invade, you hack the sprinklers. Something like, I don't know, say if you're on a spaceship and you're trying to decompress the bay you're fighting in, that might have like 4 or 6 heat caps. So you would actually need a couple players to actually like throw heat at the bay doors in order to hack them open. But yeah, that's a thing I'm always willing to. I love playing around with. I probably should get back to actually talking about my adventure and the times I did that. But yeah,
Yeah, no,
no.
I do like the just changing up the mechanical ideas and how that sort of changes the vibe of the game.
I'm a big fan of that too. No, I think that we probably said this before, but just having like terrain and things to interact with in like a combat scenario to be like the sauce, right? It's like everyone can always hit something with an attack, but the cool moments are always when you do something out of the ordinary. And like the
100%.
sprinklers and just like that's how you get stories to be unique and like how you can get combats to feel cool, right?
like a couple times I had a lot of fun with that was they were fighting space pirates because for context, players finally made it to Caledonia ahead of everybody else. They got ahead of the convoy because of plot reasons, and when they got there, they were supposed to rendezvous with one of the Caledonian flagships, the Winter's Redoubt. It wasn't there. They found out that the first antagonist, people who were behind the first story arc, the ship left because the supply train that was supposed to come to Caledonia to prep it for the arrival of millions of citizens wasn't there. So they went to go find that supply train, only to find out that it itself had been attacked by pirates, and then the flagship, the Winter's Redoubt, also got attacked. So now the players had to pivot hard. Instead of waiting for everyone else to catch up to them, they had to pivot out and find where the Winter's Redoubt is, get these supplies. So when they were fighting these pirates, they were fighting the pirates in their, ford. So they were cataphracts. And cataphracts, I had them, whenever they were using their lance, they would keep going in a straight line, and anytime they would hit a cargo container, they would move it around. So they were fighting in an arena which is littered with these cargo containers that kept moving. And then sometimes the cataphracts would do that intentionally, just because it's like, oh dang, somebody's charging up their artillery or their ordnance weapon. I'm going to move this piece of terrain in front of them to block their view. And it made for what otherwise would be a very simple, 4 cataphracts against 4 player mechs. It took the generic fight and just made it that much more spicy.
Yeah, right. Like you want, like the cataphract wants them to engage in melee so they could just fuck them up. So like I like that the cataphracts are playing to win, right? Like I like that a lot. I like that it's their they got here first and they set it up, so we're gonna make sure that we're gonna try and win. I think there's too many times where it's just like dudes are just standing around and being like, oh no, you're here, I'm gonna get shot, ow. Right? Like
yeah, I think that's good advice in general for running combat in tabletop games is, mixing up your environment and having some unique mechanics or issues or hazards within that. But also, you make a very good point, like having the enemies, if they know the players are coming and they know like, oh, the players aren't going to want to destroy this cargo or something like that, or we know that we can move it around, create our own cover, or whatever the case may be in the combat situation. If the enemies know the players are coming, I mean, the enemies want to win, so they're going to strategize in ways that, frankly, the players probably would if they were in like the reverse of that scenario.
100%. And like I'm typically bad at that, so having like a gimmick for a map really helps me along, because then it's like, okay, we're fighting in this particular type of arena, they're going to utilize these things, and in doing so, again, pertaining to your previous episode, because the NPCs are using this mechanic, it's going to let the players and encourage them to use it as well.
Yeah. That's actually the biggest thing, where the players could also use them for cover or move stuff around or whatever it is, right? Having that kind of eureka moment from the player side, being like, oh wait, I can take advantage of this too, right?
Like another great one that I did was I tried making a 4th scrolling map. So again, through hijinks and scenario, the players were landed on a hostile planet, which was like made by Rampant NHP. Was the big Eidolon fight, and they were in a canyon, and following them was a giant cloud of disassembling nanites. So in addition to the fact they were fighting aces, they also needed to run the length of this canyon and get to a base on the other side, which was at least cover. And it's a shame. One of our players, Mari, she's the girl in the picture holding the eyeball in a jar. He was playing a Zhang. So she wanted to punch terrain, but unfortunately she had to opt out. She wasn't able to make our games. We traded out with another player, Pasha, with her character Pashal, who did an amazing job, I will add, for her first time ever playing Lancer, but I digress. So yeah, they basically were going down a valley, which off the edge of the valley was lava. And there were, for those of you who don't know the geography of Alberta, a hoodoo, which is a long, thin pillar of stone that was basically made by wind erosion. So there are various hoodoos around that they actually had to knock over and use as bridges to get from gap to gap in the lava. So it created a very interesting time pressure because the players had to move, and then they had to balance: do I attack the aces that are flying around like harrying us, or do I attack the base of this pillar to create the avenue for progress? And yeah, it was a very intense thing, which our friend, the character Tikal, was actually piloting a Drake. So Senya had to, on her turn, had to keep hacking in doing puppet systems on Tikal to move her mech along. Otherwise, she was just going to get left behind.
Yeah, we had a similar situation where one of our pilots took the Barbosa into like a time-sensitive scenario, and I believe,
God.
Yeah, Calvin's character luckily was piloting a Blackbeard with synthetic muscle netting and was able to just grapple the Blackbeard, the Barbosa, and just drag him. Which I was like, yeah, that's totally fair.
I was the team truck.
Yeah, your team truck.
And then one of the other little fun things I threw in there, just because I was aware this might be an issue, is I put gravity wells. So thematically speaking, these gravity wells were supposed to collect the nanites once they have disassembled enough material and collect them. Again, Roll20 is great. I had these gravity wells create an aura of 20 hexes, and anything that's in that aura would get pulled towards the center of gravity, which meant that if a player was clever, it could help pull them along, so that way, a slower character wouldn't have as tough a time with it. But again, the aces use that a lot too, and they would get sucked into it and kind of like slingshot around. So again, introducing mechanics, try to keep the players engaged. They were far more concerned about the giant cloud of death nanites behind them, but still had fun.
Yeah.
They literally got to the facility the exact turn, because the nanite swarm would keep getting faster as they went along. So they got in the turn that it completely covered the map. So I thought they did a bang-on job.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always the fun part about those kind of crunchy time trials, where it's like you actually kind of want them to run out the clock, right, to the very last second to get in, because that's when it's the tensest and the most fun for everybody, and it's the most memorable, right? Like
Totally.
Those guys probably still talk about that, right? Like
they do.
Yeah.
And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the wedding. So again, I'm a big sucker for Firefly, and I thought one of the more fun episodes was the one where, for those of you who don't know, the main character, Malcolm Reynolds, gets forced into a sword-fighting duel in a high society type planet, and has an interesting time of it, to say the least. So I thought it would be great to kind of recreate that kind of vibe. So once the players had dealt with the pirates and gotten their supplies back, they found an unexpected hostage. There was the daughter of one minor sub-baron from the Kraken Trade Baronies, Maribeth, who was just there. So she kind of played the players a little bit and ended up developing a little bit of a relationship with Anselm. And when they finally returned her to her parent, her homeworld, and her father, she dropped the bomb. She's like, "Oh, by the way, I'm pregnant with Anselm's child," and her betrothed, another barony, basically the antagonist of the story arc. Why can't I remember his name? Terrible time for a brain fart. But anyways, he was none to say too pleased, and actually demanded that Anselm, I demand satisfaction, sir. I challenge you to a duel. So again, the fact that they had swords carried with them at all times again came into play, and they had a fun little duel. which they did actually. Again, Anselm did very well. I emphasize the fact that this guy was cheating. Spencer Arrington, of course, hence of Spencer Arrington of the House of Contemplation. Again, blip on the radar, not even like a major house, like a minor house still vying for relevance in the Greater Baronies. So thus introduces one of the other big villains, because everyone hated him so much, I had to make sure that even once they killed him, he came back as a clone seeking revenge. And I decided that anybody from the Crack and Trade Baronies ought to have the Southern drawl, which just seemed to make him that much more punchable. So yeah, it was pretty great.
Yeah.
I love this
Nothing
soap
like
opera
a-
stuff.
Yeah, nothing like a villain with a drawl, man. Like,
So it was like one of those weird things that so now the Caledonian faction was now in league with the baronies, the House of Plenty, which ironically was completely broke, and they actually were needing allies, which is why Maribeth decided to get involved with Anselm. So now Caledonia and the House of Plenty were an alliance, which was going to get solidified by Anselm marrying Maribeth. And this one was fun because the players got to actually preempt. So I gave them the map, I gave them the layout of the House of Plenty estate, and they got to set up where they thought an attack was inbound. So they actually parked the Jackrabbit next to the house and extended a hard light shield around the manor. It had 100 hit points worth of protection before things got bad. So everybody, sans Anselm, who was inside the manor getting married, they got to set up turrets, they got to set up traps, and it actually made for one of the most memorable fights because I also introduced 2 snipers on the enemy side, of course.
mhm.
So yeah, it made for a big bombastic fight. Sure enough, Spencer Arrington decided to sneak his way inside the manor and challenged Anselm to a rematch of a duel, with one little complication. Anselm was, of course, just wearing an incredibly immaculately fine suit, which I emphasized was like Kevlar weave, so it still was light armor. But Spencer was actually wearing an Atlas suit.
Oh.
Oh no, that's like a horror movie thing. This dude's just like, this man out here is just playing like he's just I'm just getting married. This is just my suit. This dude is like, but actually, I am the villain. Remember? So yeah,
No wonder
So,
they
yeah,
want to beat
so-
up this guy.
yeah, dude, calm down, man. He could just brought a gun and shot him. Like Jesus. Like,
And another fun little like twist was, and so Anselm, he would do the get organized downtime action like all the time. So he had his own sub company of like Black Ops team called Ghostwork Solutions, and Ghostwork Solutions was hired to actually provide security for the inside of the manor. So while Anselm and Spence were having their big duel, the Ghostwork Solution team was actually taking out other barony, like hostile House of Contemplation troops that were inside the wedding, trying to lock it down.
mhm.
So it actually made for some fun little like extra rolls, because not only was Anselm fighting for his life against an Atlas, he was also rolling to take out these enemy agents. So it suffice to say, it made for a very epic. It was a wedding to be remembered.
I love weddings. Like in real life, I love weddings because of how drama and complicated everything is, and it's just one incredibly stressful day for a bunch of people to come together and just kind of enjoy being happy and in love. But just the amount of effort that's put into it and how everything can always fall apart at any moment is the cool, exciting part. And then you get to take all that stress and then add in mech robots and assassination attempts and more melodrama and southern drawl and shit like that, and it's always a good time. I've been threatening in the pirate campaign to run my wife's wedding with one of the NPCs, and it's like it has to be like that kind of vibe where it's just like a lot of shit's going down is what I want to happen.
Oh come on, a pirate wedding? How can you go wrong? There's so many wonderful things that could happen.
I know. I just I need to go put the time and effort into it. But like, yeah, in my head, it's always something ridiculous like that, where it's like it needs to be like weddings. And always in TV shows, the wedding episode is always the most. I think one of the most ridiculous episodes that could ever happen. There's always tons of fallout and people doing all sorts of nonsense in it, And this sounds awesome. It actually, Mitchell, like you're making me want to like run Lancer again. Like I was like, oh,
Good.
this shit sounds
Yeah,
sick.
good.
So the wedding concluded. The big flirt was I like also making custom gear. So I gave Anselm, as a wedding gift from his father-in-law, a revolver with exploding rounds. So this could be used it does normal 1 damage, but then as a free action, for every hit that previously happened, it will do that much damage. So if you got 3 times as a free action on your turn, you could detonate all 3 bullets to do an additional 3 damage. So it's a fun way to get around like armor and stuff. So yeah, Anselm was using revolver and sword against an Atlas, and finally the Ghostwork agents had suppressed all the House of Contemplation goons. So now it was like suddenly, instead of it being like a 20 on 15, now it was like 15 on 1. And Anselm finally went and had enough time to actually activate his NHP and get his mech a metal mark to just come crashing in through the stained glass ceiling window, landing in the middle of the ballroom floor as he scrambles in and finishes the fight in his metal mark.
Oh,
And then it's just
classic.
No, that's really awesome. The actual best part about all of this is that it required all of the players to engage, right? Like Anselm didn't have to, get married to this NPC because it's all like the players' input too. Like obviously you had your ideas, but the players had to take the bait and believe it's gonna work out, right? It's like, oh, this is a good idea. It's gonna be fun. Let's go get married, right? It's like,
oh, absolutely. And I, of course, because like you have to be a little bit of a schemer and always again fail forward. I had come up with contingency plans for things to happen along the way, up to and including if Maribeth and him didn't actually click, she was just going to lie about it and just instigate this fight anyways and just completely patsy Anselm into something that he didn't engage with. Or she was going to do a similar thing to one of the other players or one of the NPCs. So that way I could still generally get the plot beats, but how it happened would be completely different.
yeah, that it's that player buy-in too, right? Like I'm always the one who's like, the GM, I can see the GM has an idea and I'm like, I want to follow this. Like I know that he wants me, like I see the bait and I'm gonna take it. Like I'm not a player to run away from shit like that. Although I'm very like stressed out when like I've suddenly become the main character even though I totally wanted the bait. Like like
see, and that's another like really delicate thing to master, and it's art, but making sure that every player gets a thread where they get to feel like the main character. It's not easy to always accomplish, especially when there's people who can't make it to every session. But I always really try to make sure that because again, as the GM, I know what all their strengths and weaknesses are. So I need to make sure that all the players get to have opportunity to really highlight their strengths, and I wouldn't say exploit weakness, but I would say make them feel vulnerable. So that way they need to ask help. That's like another like part of the fine art of being a GM.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it's like using that kind of the downtime is actually the best time. Like the downtime is for all the setup, right? When players have the moment to kind of breathe and work on stuff on their own or like reflect or like have agency and like having those moments and then propelling them into like the action and then like having that kind of up and down throughout the campaign or whatever is like how you achieve that, right? It's like you gotta give the time for players to breathe so then they can be like the tension can ratchet up again and then it can be released and then like
Definitely
right.
I realize we're probably going like really far for time, but I'll kind of just sum up the conclusion, the finale of my campaign, as well as one of the other little things I do, which I think is like just a good tip. Use real life downtime, so the space between sessions. Now, I appreciate that not everyone has time for this. At the time I did, because we didn't game every week. Sometimes there'd be like couple week gaps between like everyone's schedules. So I would try to keep the players engaged by writing little vignettes and little side stories that were happening within the universe, just so that way the players could still kind of like get a vibe of what's going on in the overall atmosphere of the world. So one of the things I tried to lay the seeds of very early was so the magistrates, the all the oligarchy that of Caledonia that were unhappy with the royal family and their whole abandoning their homeworld, they decided to actually side with Harrison Armory. And they were okay with the idea of becoming part of Harrison Armory's purview in exchange that they got to be the leaders of Caledonia. Senya's mother being the like ringleader behind this. So I did little vignettes of just radio hosts that were actually like sleeper agents from Harrison Armory that were doing like OmniNet podcasts talking about like, another great day of Caledonia. It's saying that we weren't back on New Albion, but here we are. It's almost as if the royal family failed us. For 200 years, they have done nothing but just be cater to Union's needs. If only there was another faction that could stand up and really fight for what's important to our people. So little things like that were just constantly in the background. And then it kind of came to a tumult with straight up Denelise talking to her Harrison Armory representative saying that, no, we've sent you shipments of all the weapons and arms that your forces need. And as soon as you're ready for this coup to happen, we'll begin. Then the very last one, because, Big Bad, who they were facing, one admiral from Harrison Armory, Belisarius Durgal, leader of the Vashtidan fleet. I could put that as a name, I could put that as a person, but the players wouldn't get it. It's just a name. You're just fighting like the general. That's like who you're fighting. So I made a little vignette where the admiral is called for a meeting with the like executive members of Harrison Armory, including Creighton Cruz Harrison III, and he's told that, hey, we've been monitoring your progress, and we saw that your work on the Dawnline Shore, you did great. You minimized your casualties, but we couldn't help but notice you actually haven't gained us any ground. And again, thoughts going through his head of as Belisarius thinks, he's like, it wasn't my fault. And him thinking this, not saying it, but thinking, it's like, okay, we were supposed to fight Ungratefuls. They're supposed to have like nothing, but they came out with these Horus mechs. They had this Pegasus that can just automatically shoot everything we've got. It wasn't my fault. That's what he's thinking. Outwardly, he's just portraying his calm, his smooth demeanor, because this is Harrison Armory. This is the top brass. They wouldn't take excuses. They wouldn't take weakness. They just want efficiency and they want results. So he had to listen to the chiding because he knew this was a test. If he were to react, if he were to complain, they could just take away his command. So they tell him, we're going to put you back onto the acquisition and exploration. We're putting you onto the purview. We're asking you to just go around spreading the good old name of Harrison Armory and getting people to join our team. And him thinking, okay, so I'm still going to be in command. Yes. I'm still going to have my fleet. Yes. Here's your next assignment. It's this little planet in the middle of nowhere called Caledonia. Have fun with that. And him just having to salute and nod as he's now fighting Fleabit savages. He's went from trying to gain ground on the Dawnline Shore. Now he's just going to be filed away into obscurity, fighting no-name people, never actually advancing his career. So the players got to know this information about their villain. The characters don't. But the players now understand just a little bit of the urgency and the desperation. But when this guy is sending his troops in just to die, they understand that, in the background, just in the back of their heads, they know the stakes. That's another thing I really like to do, is just kind of give the players those little bits of information. Because again, if you're reading a book or if you're watching a movie, you get those little vignettes, you get those little snippets that the characters don't get to know, but the audience does. And again, great thing about TTRPGs is that the players get to be both audience as well as active participants.
Yeah, I think that is the best thing. A lot of new GMs don't understand that the flow of information is also for everyone's enjoyment as well, right? They'll hold a lot of stuff. I think that's kind of one of the things you learn as you kind of progress. Is like you break a lot of the rules that they say not to break, and you give out more information than you think that they would need, and stuff that like they wouldn't know. But it's cool and it's fun. It just builds more excitement. Like that's kind of always what it is, right? Like I love giving like snippets of what the villain's doing, but like not like fully what like you said, right? Like you get a little background of like their attitude, because when they finally confront the villain in the fight, like realistically it's only been like a couple of seconds of these people like shooting it out or something like that on the battlefield, and with all of the chaos of combat, it's tough to kind of get those character moments in, so the villain is more fleshed out. I find it like too often the players obviously want to defeat this guy as quickly as possible and taking as little damage and risk as ever, right? But you don't get the drama of like this dude who is like has like his own feelings and own personality and has his own drive, kind of being boiled down to just kind of numbers and like maybe it's a couple of one-liners. But you know, getting the background of this dude will help out a lot and like makes the story a little bit more meatier, right?
Absolutely. And I really like when the villains get into the player's face. Again, the reason why Spencer Arrington became such a great villain for my story was that he got into like Anselm's face immediately, like, I demand satisfaction, you know, throwing insults, throwing out like, you know, just his superiority over the players, which again is a great way to make everybody in the room hate you. And it worked, and it got the players just like, they got to be not just trying to remove an obstacle from the story, they got personal. And I think that was like, chef kiss, because they wanted to see this guy go down. And then again, they didn't get as much time with like Admiral Dergal, but because they had that background information, they understood why this guy was doing what he was doing. And so one of the other little details I really like about Lancer is that when you scan the move that like nobody does, it says that you can actually access pilots' information. So you could get like financial records, you could get personal data. That's one thing for the climax. I really wanted to say that Harrison Armory, like the guys that do war for a business, they would utilize. So all while the pilots are doing their thing, periodically in between missions, they would get messages from Harrison Armory. Nathaniel Thorne, he got a great message from one of the legates of Harrison Armory, who's like, hey, I've got some people here who would really like to say hi. It's your grandfather and your dad. And, you know, camera pans, it's his father and grandfather on their knees, hands behind their back, behind basically a firing squad. And it's like, yeah, so I'll tell you what. How about you set your mech to self-destruct, and you get out, and we'll let your family live. But if you don't, well, your family's about to get a little bit smaller. So I think it's like one of those great things where come at your players from all angles, because it can't always just be, hey, we're going to try to blow you up.
Yeah. Yeah.
On the flip side, that's also a thing I would really like to see as well is like, I don't know, you're fighting a game like Space Pirates. You access like, you know, their like OmniNet Facebook account, and you see that they're like family man trying to get like their pirates. They're just trying to get like sustenance. It's like, I'll tell you what, I'm going to transfer you to like 20,000 mana. Just walk away. Take the money and run.
Ooh.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty good. Piracy is pretty complicated, right? It's a complicated situation for a lot of people. Just having that alternative being like, hey, I'll just give you some cash. Please stop shooting at us. We could all just walk away, right? There isn't enough moments of we could all just walk away, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that you're generating that sort of investment in even like the generic NPCs, and also just to tie back to what you were saying before, I do sometimes find it's difficult to communicate certain things to players, like what is this villain doing off screen, and just making sure their motivations are understood, making sure their actions are understood, and just like, you know, to make it feel like a living, breathing world, there has to be cool stuff that's happening outside the player's purview sometimes. I think that whole like newscast thing is a cool idea of how to do it in like a sci-fi setting. I mean, you've got me wanting to do that now, but I need a campaign to work on that with. But yeah, I think that was a really cool idea as well.
Yeah, and then like, but what we ended up doing was, okay, so this is like me being written into a corner. Harrison Armory has come to the Caledonian system. They're doing their thing, what they do best. This is all in space. Then on the ground, the civil war's happening. The magistrates are all rising up with their joint security task force. They're all got together. They got basically cops that have now been given military assault weapons, fighting the royal family's military and trying to take the throne. Belisarius Durgal was on the ground. He was in the royal palace supporting the magistrates, trying to help them win their big old their freedom under Harrison Armory's supervision, freedom, quote unquote. And yeah, the players were supposed to have like their big fight out there. There still was going to be a space battle. I wanted there to be a space battle. And again, bearing in mind that like space travel takes like weeks to achieve, I didn't feel as though that would kind of like work narratively, because it's like, okay, they're having this big epic ground battle, but I also need them to fight in space. So what we ended up doing was, and as I mentioned, I like to make sure the pilots they're part of a nested military unit. So by the time the players reached license level 5, I made sure that they got leveled up. They were no longer just the rank of pilot; they were now senior pilot. And Senya, who was the team's lieutenant, got promoted to lieutenant commander. And in doing so, I gave them a B team. I let them have side characters that could still join the missions when applicable. And this is where this really got to sing, because I got to have my cake and eat it too. A team got to go and do the ground fight, while B team got to go and do the space fight. So that way, narratively speaking, the events could happen simultaneously, but I didn't have to solve the equation of how do I get them from point A to point B.
Oh, I am the biggest fan of A team and B team. I think that like every campaign needs A team and B team, because, or at least like a feeder, like it's like basically just like a feeder squad of they could even just still be NPCs, but some group that the players work with so tightly that in the event, even if like one of the players dies, there's already somebody to kind of take the reins. Actually, when my friend ran us through Wallflower, my character died, I think, basically in the 3rd act, but I had been working so closely with a couple of like NPCs during like downtime stuff that I had like 2 basically subordinates that I was able to choose, being like, hey, I want to play one of these guys. Like, actually, I'm pretty sure the GM was like, you get to, like, in the moment, like, you get to pick one of these 2 dudes. One dude's a hothead and the other one's like the cool calculated type, but he's a little bit unsure, right? One's the smart one, one's the hot one, right? And I was like, okay, cool. And just the idea that I was like, even though like I wasn't playing, I haven't actually played these characters, I knew them so well that I can just jump in their shoes. And it was kind of like, it had that passing of the torch moment, right? It was like so wild, because that character, that NPC who was born like on the planet of Wallflower, like they're from the place Hercinia, where it came from, where like all the stuff is happening. Like they were the one to land the final blow on the bad guy. And it was like this kind of wild moment where like the NPC that I'm playing says the line that my character would always say, where like, you know, he was a union rep and he was always like, we're always trying to do better, right? And like she said it as she was like doing the final blow, like we're not going to repeat the sins of the past, we're going to do better. And then it was like the craziest shit. I lost my goddamn mind. But yeah, A team, B team, definitely something I encourage everyone to have.
100%. Like, again, one of those things that I kind of want to do as a staple now, just because I had a lot of fun with it, and it made, like you say, one character gets knocked out, you can have like B character step right in. You have no worry about like, you know, again, even like in Lancer, cloning takes time, so you can have like no drop in the tension or the flow of gameplay. Just keeps going.
Yeah, and like that moment, and like the character who died, we can like keep their memory alive a little bit, right? Like the new character can always reference like all the cool stuff they did, and they feel they can have those moments where it's like, am I filling this person's shoes properly, right? Like I have the weight of like their actions before. You can still like pick up a lot of plot threads. Even in Minds of Tim Delver game that Tim ran us through, we had a couple of character deaths from this one character, one player, which is super funny. But they all were a part of like this, like their background were all linked. So it felt like even though the characters were gone, we still were able to feel that story, kind of like their backstory being like told through all these other characters. So it was like, still like they were still here. It just lends to so many good moments.
No, totally. Yeah, like I don't know, it's been really great. And then like for the conclusion, like for the like my final the aftermath of my campaign, sure enough, the team ended up dividing up, and Nathaniel ended up actually becoming the leader of B team. So we actually ended up just kind of leaving it with 2 units, and it was really great because again, it kind of makes it feel like there's also that legacy aspect. Like you say, can we live up to the original heroes? Can we keep it going? But yeah, I will just kind of like conclude with the ground team when they had finally defeated the big Grand Admiral. They had finally put an end to the coup. Genelise was standing on the like dais where the throne of Caledonia was, with the like bloodied corpses of all her comrades, and Nathaniel, in his Atlas suit, because he was the Atlas guy for the team, tears a blade to Genelise's neck, and then he just asks Senya, the commander, "What are your orders?" And Senya just simply says, "I say we should live." Now, this, of course, not as like forgiving as it sounds, because currently Genelise had like a stomach wound and was bleeding out slowly. Genelise, knowing that this was her fate, immediately starts shouting at Nathaniel, being like, "You coward! Complete your mission! Like, you know, you're just like a failure like the rest of your family." And then Tito, the player of Nathaniel, not missing a beat, immediately goes into like the gunslinger litany and goes like, you know, a coward is not is somebody who's forgotten to face their father. You know, I do not kill with my gun. I kill with my heart, kind of deal. And beats his sword and then just walks away. And then I try to frame it, because I always try to frame cinematic moments as a cinema. So camera is at level with Denelise's face as she's like reaching for Nathaniel, trying to grab his like leg to pull him back, trying to get him to finish her off, to end that like, you know, game of defeat and misery. As Nathaniel walks down the dais, finally when he gets to camera level, the camera begins to pull away, and all the pilots out of their mechs all start to walk towards the camera, which continues to pull all the way to the open entrance of the royal chamber. Genelise in the background, her screams becoming more and more distant and echoed as she just keeps saying, "No, no, finish me! Coward, finish me!" And scene. That's where the ground mission completed. And then it was up to the B team to stop the fight in the sky.
Yeah,
love a good villain ending, man. That's great.
It's like the stuff of like dreams, man. Like every time I'm like, yes, just this villain that you've been just putting these little crumbs everywhere is tied to a PC, just all of the good stuff, and it's just like, and then you get the standoff of like ideals, and then it's like, you know, yeah, it is a chef's kiss.
I think it's very difficult to end a campaign sometimes.
It is.
Yeah, for sure.
Like that could be a whole subject unto itself.
Again, I tried to tie things up really nicely. I don't want to go over time. Let me know if we're like getting there, but
Oh, I mean, we're definitely not going to be able to cover Pathfinder today. But if you want to finish your final thoughts on this before we wrap up, then go ahead with them.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, Guy Team, they were fighting on one of the space stations run by Caledonia, and they found out that the Harrison Armory had linked up a TBK, like a total biome kill weapon, to the reactor core of this space station. And plot point, the space station has a large mass driver. It's basically was used for mining. It could just take giant asteroids, move them around as need be, and disassemble them. So the plan ended up being for Harrison Armory, they were going to activate this TBK weapon, nuke everybody on the space station, and keep it for themselves. Players obviously didn't want that to happen, and they came up with a scheme. They were going to remove the reactor, one of the 4 reactor cores for the space station, the one for which this TVK weapon is actually attached to, and use that large mass driver to actually fling the TVK weapon at the Harrison Armory flagship, thusly annihilating them instead. The only problem with, in order to do this, they would actually need to go into the aperture of the large mass driver itself. And when they did so, they, of course, met fierce resistance, and then a familiar face. "Anselm! Here we are at the end of your world, and we get reunited. I say this must be kismet. And they're like, no fucking way. No way. And yes, Spencer Arrington came back.
Yes.
Yes. That's so good.
So they're fighting in compressed space, which is how the large mass driver works. It compresses space, kind of like think pneumatics, and then flings it back out the aperture. So they're traveling down a 5-kilometer long corridor. Their mechs, the HUDs inside their mechs are going haywire. You know, the comms are like, pilot, your heart has stopped. Are you okay? All their vital signs, because it's not meant for organic transport. It's meant for just like inorganic matter. So the fact that they're in their mechs fighting in compressed space, that doesn't really jive too well. They're having their big final fight, and then they get to the end of the aperture and they get shunted out. So all the players, you know, as you can probably can imagine, having like all of your molecules compressed, a la like, you know, Ant-Man, then returning violently back to normal, it's probably going to mess you up. Anselm, from his point of view, he kind of slowly comes to, finding again alarm klaxons all over his mech, going haywire, and he can visibly see red sword marks through his cockpit, as finally a hand ripped through the cockpit, rips off the front, and there's again Spencer in his Atlas suit, wanting one final showdown with Anselm. Turns into one big epic fight, which ultimately ends with Anselm getting to do, he was in a Nelson, and he finally got to do his like ZF solid core power to just completely annihilate Spencer. And I emphasize the fact that he's doing this with an exposed cockpit. So him, the pilot, is literally like feet away from this like ZF solid core, just annihilating his would-be foe. His flex suit boiling and blistering and like burning to his skin as he does it. And with that final like conclusion, the threat of Harrison Armory has now finally ended. But of course, it doesn't end there. So again, tying into that, how do you end this? A couple like days go by. Players are like, you know, the players, both teams are like heading back home. They're in the capital city trying to deal with the new government that's being like hastily assembled from the survivors, figuring out what to do next. When they get a message from Harrison Armory. And sure enough, just a good old-fashioned 5-star general is just like, hey, we're really sorry about what happened with Mr. Durgal there. Harrison Armory disavows any knowledge of his actions, and we apologize for any inconvenience to your normal day-to-day life. Which, you know, all the players were grumbling, like, that's an understatement. And, like, Senya's like, we're taking this to Union, I hope you know. And, like, no worries, we already did 3 days ago. And it's like, this fight began 3 days ago. And it's like, we actually already took care of it. We have been ordered to give you guys compensation. Please accept 300 billion mana as a compensation for any of your lost, like, property, ships, and whatever. Unless, of course, you don't want that, and you would like to appeal this decision, which might take anywhere between 50 to 200 years to get pushed through Union courts. Your choice.
That's so funny. Oh my god. That's like so funny.
It's like you read like how Union's made, and it's like Harrison Armory, they're like on the Senate. They're there. They're present on Cradle. So it's like they're aware of things before like anybody else, right? Like the second that the fight started to go poorly, they're like, okay, we're submitting starting a case. We got this admiral. We don't know what he's doing. I don't know. He's just acting on his own accord. So how should we compensate these people in the middle of nowhere, these Caledonians? So yeah, for them, they already could see that the end was coming. They already wrapped it up, so that way they couldn't be liable. I also added in the 5-star generals like, and please, by all means, you'll get we'll give you a one-time voucher. Any supplies that you order through Harrison Armory will come at a 20% discount. They did not take 20%. The voucher.
Wow, that's a really good way to wrap up the campaign. Honestly, like it sounds like your players had a good time. Curious, how long did all this take to unravel?
I'll say like in real time, it took about a year. Meeting like every week, every other week for 5 to 6 hours, like on a Friday night kind of deal. Mm-hmm. And like I say, I thought it was really great because using that downtime, like in between sessions, worked really well. So more happened in between the sessions, or I guess as much happened between the sessions as did in the session themselves. I felt, anyways. And yeah, everyone had a great time. The commanding officer Senya, she ended up joining Union Department of Justice. She felt that her job there was done. Nathaniel became the commanding officer of one of the units, like I believe Alpha Team, and then Anselm became leader of Beta Team very reluctantly. And yeah, everyone kind of had their like walk off into the sunset with a to be continued, because again, there's still Alpha and Beta teams running. More stuff could happen within Caledonian space.
You say so for like that part 2, right?
Absolutely. And like my friend Cheeto, he's been knocking out of the park. He's been coming up with custom mechs, all part of the Caledonian defense arsenal. He's been like really cooking the books, just making his own stuff. And I don't know, maybe I'll get permission to share it sometime. But yeah, he's been really keeping that torch running, especially. And yeah, I don't know. I'm hoping that one day we'll revisit. For now, of course, the story of Caledonia has taken a little break. But yeah, that's what I've been doing for the last little while.
Well, that sounds awesome, Mitchell. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing the story. I think it's definitely got me and Calvin excited to do some Lancer stuff, and definitely gonna steal a bunch of ideas. I think the campaign sounds awesome. Sounds like your players sound like they had a really good time. So yeah, I hope that the listeners get to get the vibe off of this and go do some cool Lancer stuff too.
Well, absolutely, and thank you very much for having me on. It's been a blast.
Yeah, I mean, I really liked a lot of the mechanical stuff you were talking about. I like a lot of the narrative stuff that you did, and I think that conclusion was a whole lot of fun. So, yeah, like Rowan said, I hope people really enjoyed hearing about all of that. Is there anything else you wanted to add real quick before we roll into the outro? This is a bit of a longer one, so we might have to maybe do a follow-up for this for your Pathfinder stuff, because that was something else I also wanted to get into. But yeah, was there anything else you wanted to mention about your Lancer campaign before we wrap up?
I had a cool fight inside of a spaceship, and then the players had to shoot through the walls. That was really cool. The hallways are pinned down with too many mechs, and they're like, go through the wall, and then that ZF solid core just blasting a hole through the door, and the bulkheads to make advancement. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that does sound pretty cool.
Yeah, just let the players tear through the environment. Let them make their own map.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, this has been a great episode. Thanks a ton, everybody out there, for checking it out and listening. Mitchell, thanks again for coming by and just, sharing your game and your game world with us. And the artwork as well, which hopefully, as long as we have permission to do so, I definitely want to share it with the YouTube audience so people can see it.
Yep. I already asked my friend Cheeto. He says he's A-okay with that, so...
Awesome. So, yeah, we'll for sure have that in the episodes. As well, if you are into the Lancer RPG, and hopefully you are, if you're on YouTube, if you scroll down and into the description of this episode, you'll see a bunch of links to other Lancer writers and creators, all the incredible stuff that they're working on, a bunch of people we've talked to before, so go ahead and check all of that out if you want to spice up your Lancer game. And who knows, maybe if anything in regards to Caledonia gets published, we can link it there as well. I think that could be a fun idea if you're interested in that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Additionally, I want to shout out the Untold Stories project, where I'm at occasionally during their one-shot season. As always, for the last couple months of the year, they pause the series that are ongoing, and they do a bunch of one-shots at different games. I think it was Old Gods of Appalachia or something like that they just played recently, and also wrapped up the Cthulhu Awakens game that I was a part of. So if you want to see some teens messing with the Dreamlands and other stuff that they should not be messing with, go ahead and check that out. As for our stuff on here, if you're interested in gaming streams, there's gaming streams on this channel going through Baldur's Gate 3, Armored Core 6, and The Evil Within. Going to do an Alan Wake 2 episode because of the DLC that just dropped, so that should actually be out by the time this episode is out. Is there anything else either of you want to say before we wrap up here?
I think we're good.
Yeah, I'm groovy.
All right. Well, for all of our GMs and players out there who have rivals that just somehow keep coming back at the most inconvenient times, just remember to keep on winning with dice, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.
Bye.